obviously growing up, you were a lot of people's favourite player. Did you feel like, though, you were swimming against the tide in a game that at the time was very much... It was very direct. The coaching system was very long ball. The pitches were quite muddy. Did you feel as though you were swimming against the tide?
100%. 100%. I had to stick to my guns. I'm pretty, I was strong-minded even as a kid. Although I wasn't sort of mouthy or anything like that, I'd always sort of keep myself to myself as a player, normally until a bit older that happened. But no, I had to really fight against it, even as a youngster, when I come through Tottenham and that, and standing up to... I remember standing up to Ron Henry, who in the 60s, the double team, hard as nails, left back. He used to coach us a little bit in the Tuesday and Thursday nights. And I remember he was doing, like, passing inside the right foot, inside the left foot, up, 15 yards away. And I got a bit bored, to be honest. I started playing with the outside of my left foot and the outside of my right foot. And he's come over and he's gone, Hoddle, he said, inside the foot. And I went, yeah, and I answered him back. And all the lads went, I was only 12. I said, yeah, but if I take it with the outside of my foot, I'm taking it earlier. And he looked at me and he clipped me around the head. And he went, inside the foot, you flash little git, wallop. And all the lads went, what are you doing? But that was me. If I felt I was right, then I'd say I'd have...
You didn't change it then? You didn't...
No, that was the thing, Ian. It was about... I could have changed a lot. And I remember Stevie Perriman, actually, I was talking to that. Stevie Perriman called me, I was 17, 18, just got in the first team, and Stevie said to me, don't change. He said, because when Bill Nicholson, there was a spot in the team, Bill Nicholson, he was a very creative player, Stevie, when he was 15, 17, 16. He said, I was so creative. He said, but I changed for Bill Nicholson. There was a spot in the team. He said he wanted a hard, tough little terrier in there. Keep it simple. He said, Steve, don't give the ball away. He said, and I changed. And he saw something in me then and said, don't change. And I said, well, I don't feel as if I will change, but it was something that really stayed with me. And I thought, no, stick to your guns, because it was a different game then. The ball was in the air, as you say. It was, people
flying in.
Yeah, they could kick lumps out of you.
But what would they expect you to change, Glenn?
Well, that's a good point, actually. I don't think I could have played any other way.
Right.
Yeah. But
when does it change? Be a bit more defensive or played safe?
Maybe.
With that type of...
I mean, I always had battles with Keith Birkinshaw. He was the manager I was under most. And Keith always wanted me in the box, get back in the box, It was box to box back in then. Every midfield player had to do it wherever. And even though at Tottenham, I've got to say, even then, I only played... When Ricky Villa came, he played as a number 10, because he couldn't... He was worse than me at defending. He couldn't defend at all. So I ended up playing sort of a lopsided diamond on the right-hand side. I never really played until the last season at Tottenham as a number 10 behind Clive Allen, who scored 49 goals that year. But I played on the right-hand side, and it makes me laugh. People used to say, he couldn't defend. And I was playing in front of Stevie Perriman, my skipper, and Stevie wouldn't let you get away with anything. And he very rarely had to tell me that I weren't getting back or whatever. I tried my best. It wasn't my natural game.
Right. No, but if you think of a Spurs player, you think of you, Glenn, don't you? What a Spurs player maybe
Stylish.
looks like. Yeah, stylish, elegant, Doesn't run back.
If he can help it. If he can get away with it. If he can get away with it.
The way you played, and like you said, you had to stick to your guns, but you did play differently. You could get on the ball. You would try and do something in the midfield, make space, left foot, right foot pass with backspin and everything like that. So who was the manager that said, no, you play like that?
Well, that's a good point, because I just play. That's always the way I was going to play. That was the sort of, not debate, but that I was never going to change, and no one ever tried to change me, fortunately. But it was swimming against the tide of the system, really. That's what we're talking about. And there was other players, There was Barnesy, he was at Watford, wasn't he? John Barnes, wonderful player. My word, they
surely Spurs accepted it. Was that more international football, or was that more... Did you have them challenges even at Spurs?
Oh, right. Not really at Tottenham to a degree, no, because it was the style of the club. Like you said, I felt as a kid, even when I went there as I was 12, it was like hand in glove. We went together as a club, the way they wanted the game played and the way I played it naturally.
I know I keep being selfish and bringing it back to myself and the England squad that I was involved in, and you made it fun. It's probably the most enjoyable time I had when I was with England, and a lot of that was to do with skill-based warm-ups. And I remember some players, like Michael Lamb was one of them, used to go, oh no, he's doing this again. I can't really, because they didn't want to do skill stuff. Some people just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I loved it. But was there a reason behind, because some of your training was really based around the match and your opponent and exploiting their weakness, like we spoke about earlier. But then the beginning of it was very much fun. What was the thought process for all the coaches watching, going into sessions?
Well, it was difficult. It was difficult when that was the change from being a club manager to having time. You had to get on. You had to get on with the stuff you needed to, what I call the serious stuff of getting what was going to, your opponents. You knew how they were going to play. You knew how you wanted to play. There were certain things in a game that were going to happen, and you wanted to demand that and get clarification for your team. So that was what I call the basic serious side about building for that match. And that's what happened with England. It's all quiet, and then suddenly when England come together, it's like a volcano waiting to go off again. You don't really take any consideration about a volcano until it actually explodes. And that's like getting together with England was like that. It was so massive. Everyone's eyes and press and everything for that week was bang, and that's what it is like for Gareth now. But I felt that we had limited time, but I felt you needed to break that down. And for me, being a technical player, not so much a player, but with a technical eye, I needed my. I as an England player, was fed up with chasing opponents in midfield. We were outnumbered in midfield, and when we got the ball, we didn't have enough because we were too rigid in our system. So I said to myself, if I ever got that job, which I didn't set out to get, but if I ever got the England job, the one thing I will do is I'm going to fill that midfield up. That's where I think you win and lose games, particularly in international football. And that's why we played three at the back, and that's why we had wing backs and we had different combinations and styles. We played in La Tournoi and won that La Tournoi before the World Cup, playing with two little inside forwards and one striker, which people are playing now with wing backs. And we played some beautiful football. But I think if you can't ask your team to do that, I needed to know which players could cope with the technical side of the game. We're international footballers. We should be able to cope with the football. At the end of the day, it's called football, not head ball, not chase ball.
But in their warm-up, some people couldn't.
Well, that's it. But they had to improve. Serious. They had to improve.
Like who?
Yeah, I'm thinking names.
Glenn's got a better memory than me.
Bottled
but
in.
you could very quickly you could see the lads that were like But Michael Owen, for instance, wouldn't have. Gary Lineker hated stuff like that. He was one of our greatest strikers, like Michael was. We were talking about Michael today. What a striker! And he knew his job was like his pace, score goals. He wasn't too interested. But even Michael, if he works at his left foot, you can all improve. And if you don't put them sessions on, you'll never improve. Because then you can go and do that against a brick wall when you're 11, but when you're in the England camp, you've got to do it in a match. It's got to be something that you're improving to actually at the top level. So unless you practice it, unless you feel comfortable with it, you're never going to improve. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, you're never going to use it in a game anyway. But you won't know until you're put under that test, under that little bit of pressure, because you have to produce them skills, as I say, when you need them, out there on the pitch, in a pressurised situation. Jimmy Greaves, he came back for a testimonial. I mean, Greaves was I was a Spurs fan at 8, so Jimmy Greaves was massive to the club and watching. But strangely enough, my two players, I had two other players that everyone loved. George Best. Yeah. Bestie was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And there was something about him, obviously, that aura. He was like the fifth Beatle, wasn't he? But if I look at my game, and I always admired Bobby Charlton. So it was two Man United players. Bobby Charlton was more of, I remember copying his body swerve, getting his body swerve going, and the influence and he was left foot and right foot and shot from distance. So looking at me as a player, I would say it was more than George Best. It wasn't like George Best, but he was the one everyone loved. Jimmy Greaves was amazing. I learnt something from Jimmy Greaves when he came back to play a testimonial for himself at Tottenham against West Ham. And unfortunately, I was only young, and I think I was just apprentice, just maybe a little bit out of the apprenticeship. Anyway, I was watching this game down in the gym. It must have been about 13 aside. There was hardly any space anywhere. But I was just watching Jimmy, and he hardly ever looked at where the ball was. He was for always looking over his shoulder. Where's the goal? Where am I related to the goal? Within about 10 minutes, he'd scored about 13 goals. It was only small goals. It was incredible. And I remember saying, I'm playing in midfield where it's 360 degrees. That's something I need to... I probably was doing it as a player, but it was so evident, and I kept saying, he's not even looking at where the ball is. And whenever he came, he knew exactly where his defender was, where the goals were, and he was amazing. So that was a big lesson for me, like, you know, playing in what I call 360 degrees, always not having, as that ball travelled in between distances, two players, you ain't got to look at the ball. It ain't going anywhere, is it? But that's the time you got to be looking.
But you must have had that your game as well, Glenn, when you were a player, obviously, and then you had brilliant strikers making runs for you, people like Clive Allen, and they must have known, like when they were making runs, it does help you if you think, I'll make the proper run.
It's coming.
You're going to pick him out.
Yeah. Not always, but yeah.
Most of the time, yeah.
But Archibald and Crooks.
Archibald, of course, yeah.
Those two were great. When they come, I love playing with them too. I mean...
Why, because they'd always run that way as well, I think, yeah.
And they knew
when Archibald would come, wouldn't he?
And come off, yeah. And Archie would go in behind. That put us into another... That put that team to another level. Actually, we had a solid... And Ray Clem come. The midfield, as I said, lovely footballers. How it worked defensively, I don't know. But then once
5-4.
But then when Archibald and Crooks come, we had two really good finishers as well. They wanted to go in behind, so that really suited my game, you know.
Who was the hardest player you played against? Who was your toughest opponent? Or the best player you played against? Obviously...
God, yeah, that's a good question. The best player I've ever played against was Maradona, without a doubt. But the toughest is...
Souness, is he in there?
Souness was bordering on tough come dirty.
I'm legally obligated.
No, if he was sitting here, he'd laugh because Graham was a hard player, a good player. Don't get me wrong. People always say about his toughness and he was bordering on, you know, he could go look after himself. Let's put it that way. But he was a good player. He could use the ball. Very good player. Great player.
I think I have to ask about Brian Robson.
Yeah, Robbo.
I was going to say, who's the best midfielder of your generation? Does Robbo come into that?
Yeah, Robbo for me always. I was suited really to continental football. I knew that as a kid. Coming through, I was going to have to fight against the tide. I think Robbo was made for British football, English football. He was a box to box. He had a little bit of everything. He had stamina. He had a little bit of pace. He could defend. You know, he could get in the box and score goals. He picked a pass as well. He had a little bit of everything, which in them days, back then, it's different to today. You know, Robbo could play in any era because he was that good. But it was more looked upon in 4-4-2, box to box, midfield, and that's how it was back in the day. There wasn't a number 10 position, and I was a number 10, never really played there until I went to Monaco. As soon as I got to Monaco with Arsene Wenger, there was a position in France, and it was the most important position to the team. That's the key. There wasn't a position in England. We've got loads of 10s now, haven't we?
Where did they play in England then? Did they play as one
I
of the
played
8s?
a lot of them. No, we didn't have an 8. I would like to have played in even an 8, but I played out on the right-hand side, on the wing, really. There was better wingers than me. Trevor Stephen, Stevie Coppell were... If you wanted to play a wide man, they sort of tried to fix me into the team in many ways.
Did you feel...
I played a few times with Robbo in the centre and midfield, and I felt that... I remember Ron Atkinson trying to buy me for Man United, and he thought me and Robbo would be perfect. And I remember sitting down with him, talking to him, chatting to him, come very close to coming. And I think, you know, that would have been interesting. But in the end, I stayed at Tottenham and for 13 years. But I could see what he was saying. He saw that as a real good balance between the two of us, and I think it would have been. And at club level, I think we could have took it on even more. But Robbo was a great player, yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about England because actually it's really terrible what happened to you with England. So 97-98, Wenger's arrived and you're Player of the Year that England win the double, and Glenn Hoddle leaves you out of the squad. Your complete squad, like even the squad that Gaza was in before he flipped out because he wasn't been...
This was a squad, yeah.
This was everybody was in this squad, and he leaves you out because of what you said about Eileen Drury.
Yes, that's true, yeah. I mean, it's probably one of my best seasons I had, 97-98. I played probably 36 out of 38 league games, and we had a really good understanding, all the team, and I got player of the season, played in the cup final, got man of the match, so I was really, this could be my big chance at the World Cup. You know, I'm probably not going to play, but to travel to a World Cup and be involved with the team, and it was a true story. I remember pulling my calf in training one day, Robbie and probably Andy was in the squad at the time, and I went to see. I think Robbie ended up started laughing in the medical room. In fact, I went in there, and Glenn Hoddle all of a sudden come in and said, "What you done, son?" I said, "I think I pulled my calf, boss." So he said, "Okay, before you go for your scan, I want you to go and see Eileen Drury, our faith healer." I was like, "Who's Eileen Drury?" So anyway, off I go upstairs, room 36, knocked on the door, she opened the door, sat down in this chair, and she pulled the curtains, went in the bathroom. I'm thinking, "God, I tell you, she's putting something sexy on now." She's quite an attractive lady for 50, to be honest with you. Next minute, she's circling me, going round and all of a sudden she puts her hands on the back of my head. And all I said innocently was, "Short back and sides, Eileen, what you And I did need an haircut at the time, I must admit. Because it was a bit dodgy, me barnet. But, so I didn't think nothing of it. So I laughed, she laughed. She's ended up telling all of the people at the bar. They've told all the players. Next minute, front page of the Sun newspaper. Short back and sides, because the press were really after the same with Eileen Drury. So I was absolutely couldn't believe it. So next minute comes up, next squad comes out, playing really well, get back to full fitness, not in the squad. Asked him, "Why are you not in the squad?" I said, "Boss, I think the same I said." He said, "No chance, that won't happen." This is the one Gaz that you smashed the room up in La Manga, wasn't in the 30 to be cut down to 25. So now Wenger said, "I'll phone him up to see why you're not in the squad." And that was the true story. He said, "I disrespected his faith, and I'm not going to pick Kelly this year." So that year, I was absolutely distraught. Every single paper you picked up, France 98 and the World Cup, this, that, whatever. And I got married instead that year. So that cost me another load of money. So it's a nightmare. I had a nightmare year.
I didn't know if I was allowed to bring that up, actually.
When Glenn Hoddle, obviously, you had your kind of where you turned him down, maybe moving to him, and then he comes to Southampton. What was the relationship like there? Because
kind of mixed feelings really when he came into Southampton, because obviously he'd left me out of the '98 World Cup squad as England manager, and I was very, very disappointed at that. And then a year later, I think it was, or a few months later, he's turning up at Southampton as manager, and it was kind of mixed feelings because he was my hero as a kid. I loved him as a footballer. And I just hoped that kind of we'd be able to get on, and it never really materialised. He kind of almost went out of his way to kind of pick on me in training and stuff. When I'd make a mistake, he'd be jumping down my throat. Other players would make mistakes, he wouldn't say anything. And I felt like it was a little bit unfair. And if there's one thing that really annoys me in this life, it's unfairness. And so he was kind of the only manager who I really snapped at during my career. I just remember once in a training session, I'd tried to pick someone out with a pass. It didn't go the way it was planned, and he just jumped straight down my throat, and I just felt myself so frustrated. Not that frustrated that I hadn't passed it properly, but also that he's just on my case. Yeah, like he's not on anybody else's case. And I just turned around and why don't you just off? and it was the first time I'd ever sworn at my manager, and I was like 30 years of age at this point, 31, something like that. And I'd never sworn at my manager. I was always very respectful. Even when they dropped me, I never swore at them. I never kind of demanded to be put back in the team. I'd just get on with it, and I just lost it at that point. People thought I was lazy. I wasn't lazy. I was economical.
Yeah.